The road to Millerton does not feel like a road to a town at first. It feels like a road leaving the coast behind. Below you is Granity, the strip of houses, the railway side, the gray Tasman Sea pushing at the edge of the land. Then the road begins to climb. The bush comes closer. The air cools. On a wet day, which is not rare on this coast, the cloud can sit low enough that the hill seems to be taking you into its own weather. And then, above the sea, there is Millerton. Not quite abandoned, not quite alive in the old sense either. A few houses, some relics, a road grid that remembers more people than it now carries. A settlement that can look, from one angle, like New Zealand has quietly forgotten it. But Millerton is not simple. If you only call it a ghost town, you miss the people who still live there. If you only call it a coal town, you miss the strange part. The old town faded, but coal did not really leave the mountain. It changed shape. That is the question on this road. Why does Millerton feel like a place left behind when the coal story around it is still not finished? Millerton sits in the Buller district on the west coast of the South Island, north of Westport and above the coastal settlements of Granity, Nakawau, and Hector. Tayara describes it as a high-altitude settlement about 31 kilometers northeast of Westport. It was opened as a company town in 1896 for miners working the nearby Millerton Mine. That date matters because it tells you what Millerton was before it was a view, before it was a quiet road, before people began using words like forgotten. It was a machine for living near work. Not a machine in the cold sense. Children went to school here. Families made homes here. Men walked to shifts. People knew who was sick, who had a new baby, who had been hurt, who was leaving. But the town existed because coal was under the plateau, and the Westport Coal Company needed a settlement close enough to make that coal useful. On the coast below, Granity had the easier ground. The sea was there, the railway was there, the loading points were there. But the coal was not politely waiting beside the beach. It was up in the ranges, where transport became the first problem. That is why Millerton begins with a practical question. How do you get heavy coal down a steep west coast hillside? The answer was not romantic. It was incline, rope, bins, wagons, timing, brakes, work gangs, and weather. The Westport Coal Company built the Millerton Incline in the 1890s. Local histories place the incline in 1891, with the mine beginning production in 1896. Coal from the workings had to be moved down toward the coastal rail system, where it could enter a much larger economy of steamships, railways, factories, and export. So the town above the sea was tied to the line below it. That is one of the quiet secrets of mining towns. They can look isolated on a map, but they are often built as pieces of a wider industrial chain. Millerton was not just a hilltop settlement. It was one link between underground coal seams, the incline, Granity, the railway, Westport, and the ships and boilers that needed West Coast coal. In the early 20th century, that coal mattered nationally. Tayara notes that the Westport Coal Company developed major deposits at Millerton and Stockton, and that by 1914, 1/3 of New Zealand's coal came from the Buller mines. That is a large number for a place that can now feel so quiet under low cloud. It means the silence is misleading. The road you drive today was once connected to one of the country's most important coal districts. The old houses were not sitting at the edge of history, they were inside it. But history on the West Coast rarely arrives in polished form. It comes wet, hard, practical, and expensive. The plateau towns around Buller were shaped by difficult ground. Nearby Denniston became famous for its own incline and its harsh exposed life. The Department of Conservation describes Denniston as one of the most isolated and difficult mining towns to live in, with early access by pack track or coal wagon before the current road was built. Millerton was lower than Denniston, but it shared the same basic problem. Coal was up, transport was down, and families had to live where the work demanded. You can imagine the ordinary cost of that. Weather did not care that the mine needed men on shift. Wind did not care that washing had to dry. Rain did not care that children needed to get somewhere in boots and coats. The hill gave the town its purpose, but it also took payment every day. And yet people stayed. That is the part outsiders often miss. These places were not only miserable. Hard places can still create deep belonging. The same road that felt like isolation to a visitor could feel like home to someone whose father worked underground, whose mother knew every neighbor, whose family measured the week by shifts, pay, school, shop, weather, and the sound of the machinery. Millerton was a company town, but it was also a human pattern. The pattern looked like this: coal in the hill, mine near the settlement, incline to the coast, railway to market, wages into households, households into community, community into memory. If one part broke, the rest would feel it. Subscribe if these quiet corners of New Zealand interest you, because Millerton is where the story begins to bend. The old town looks like decline, but the mountain is not done speaking. The first bend is the mine itself. Underground coal towns are built around a kind of intimacy with the ground. The work happens beneath the surface. The town learns to read what cannot be seen. A shift goes down. A shift comes up. A whistle, a wage packet, a rumor about a seam, a worry about safety. The surface life depends on an underground world. That kind of town produces a strong identity. People are not simply residents, they are part of the mine's nervous system. But it also creates a dangerous dependence. If the mine changes, the town changes. If transport changes, the town changes. If demand changes, the town changes. If a better method appears somewhere else on the same plateau, the town may still be standing, but its reason for being can start to move away from it. That is what makes Millerton more interesting than a simple abandoned place story. The easy version would be this: Coal Town opens, Coal Town booms, Coal Town closes, everyone leaves. But the West Coast does not usually give you the easy version. Here is the midpoint twist. Coal did not disappear from the high country above Granity. The old town declined, but nearby Stockton became a very different kind of coal landscape. Bathurst Resources describes Stockton in the Buller coalfield as the largest open-cast mine in New Zealand, producing high-quality steelmaking coal for export. So Millerton is not only a story about the end of coal, it is a story about coal changing its body. The old body was underground mines, small houses, local routines, incline infrastructure, company settlement, and the close social world of a mining town. The newer body is larger scale, open cast, export focused, machine heavy, regulated, mapped, and separated from the old village life. That shift matters. When industry changes form, a town can be left holding the memory of work without the same amount of work itself. The resource is still there. The landscape still has value. Trucks, permits, machines, and markets may still move around the plateau. But the old community pattern has been broken. That is why a place can feel haunted without being empty. Millerton's quiet is not the quiet of nothing happening. It is the quiet of a town whose original equation no longer balances. The wider coal market helped make that happen. NZ History, writing about the decline of mining in the Buller coalfield, notes that after 1956, demand slumped as many customers changed to oil. Smaller mines gradually closed when they could not find markets for the coal they produced. The details varied from place to place, but the pressure was regional. Coal towns were built for a fuel economy that was changing under them. That is a harder story than one dramatic closure. One dramatic closure gives you a clean date. A changing market gives you years of uncertainty. A shop closes. A family moves down to the coast. A school roll thins. A house is sold cheaply or not sold at all. A building is stripped for materials. A track becomes overgrown. A place stops being necessary to the country before it stops mattering to the people who remember it. Distance has a cost in these towns, but lost purpose has a cost too. On paper, Millerton can sound attractive to a certain kind of person. It is quiet. It is high above the coast. It has history, views, bush, weather, and a sense of being outside the usual suburban rhythm. Teada notes that a small community survives there, attracted partly by cheap land and housing. But cheap is not simple. Cheap can mean beautiful but remote. Cheap can mean special but inconvenient. Cheap can mean a house with a view and a road that reminds you every winter that the coast below is easier. Cheap can mean the market has priced in distance, services, weather, employment, and resale. That is not an insult to the place. It is respect for the practical truth of it. A hilltop town is not just a dream of quiet. It is groceries, repairs, medical appointments, school decisions, road conditions, insurance, fuel, work, and the patience to live with weather. Some people are made for that. Some people discover they only liked the photograph. Millerton has always tested that difference. The old miners and their families did not live there because it was a lifestyle brand. They lived there because work and wages pulled them uphill. If they found beauty there, and many people did, it was beauty mixed with labor. The sea view was not separate from the coal dust. The mist was not separate from the shift. That is why the remains matter. Relics in a place like Millerton are not decoration, they are instructions. A rusted piece of track says, "This hill had to be engineered." An old cottage says, "Families turned industrial necessity into domestic life." A broken foundation says, "The town was more crowded than it looks now." A road line says, "The old map still exists under the new quiet." If you visit, you have to read slowly. Not every missing building announces itself. Not every old route is obvious. The West Coast is very good at taking things back. Vegetation does not erase history all at once. It softens it first. It covers corners, hides metal, rounds off the edges of human intention. That can make a place look more peaceful than it was. Coal towns were not gentle machines. They were hard on bodies. They depended on dangerous work. They created close communities, but they also exposed families to uncertainty, injury, industrial conflict, and the long anxiety of whether the mine would keep paying. So we should be careful with nostalgia. The old Millerton was not a lost paradise. It was not only hardship either. It was both. A working settlement with pride, discomfort, humor, danger, weather, routine, and the stubborn social life that grows when people have to depend on one another. The strange thing is that the present town still carries that mixture. It is quiet, but not blank. It is small, but not meaningless. It is isolated, but not disconnected from national history. It is partly a ghost town, partly a living settlement, and partly a viewing platform over a changed industrial world. Keep this channel close if old roads interest you. The last part of Millerton is not the mine or the incline or even the houses. It is the question of what a town becomes after its first purpose leaves. There are places where decline looks like a clean ending. Millerton does not. The coal seams, the plateau, Stockton, Granity, Westport, the rail corridor, and the coast all make the story larger than one village. The old settlement is quiet because the human arrangement changed. But the mountain was not emptied of value. The value simply no longer required the same kind of town around it. That is a very modern kind of loneliness. Many places experience it. A port automates, a railway bypasses a station, a mill closes but forestry continues. A mine changes from labor-intensive underground work to machine-heavy extraction. The landscape is still productive, but the local social world that used to surround production gets thinner. Millerton shows that clearly because the town is still there above the sea. You can stand in a place where households once made sense because of a mine and look toward a district where coal still makes sense in another form. Past and present do not cancel each other. They sit awkwardly on the same hill. That is why Millerton is worth more than a quick ghost town label. A ghost town is usually a place where we expect absence. Millerton asks for a different word. It asks us to notice continuity and loss at the same time. It asks how a town can survive after the reason for its size has gone. It asks what remains when industry stops needing families in the same way, but families and memories still need the place. The answer is not dramatic. What remains is a road. A few homes, relics in the damp. A settlement name that still pulls history uphill. The sea below, the plateau behind. A coal story that changed form but did not quite end. If you go there, go as a listener. Do not expect a theme park. Do not expect a ruined city. Expect small signs. Expect weather. Expect to look at an ordinary road and realize it once carried a whole industrial logic. Expect to feel that the quiet is doing more work than it first admits. Millerton was built because the coal was up there. It became quiet because the world found other ways to use the coal, other fuels to burn, other machines to move, and other places for families to live. But it is still up there, and old hill towns have a way of refusing to become only the past. I'm Graham, and old maps have a habit of showing us the places where work, weather, and memory got tied together so tightly that even silence cannot quite undo the knot. Look after yourself, and I will see you on the next road.